happy to have you here to hear about this incredible self-optimizing technology. So looks like Jen has probably invited you here. Well, I'm assuming Balance Health has invited you here. And really, I love this first slide because, and I'm going to introduce myself in a little bit more in depth in a minute. My name is Jessica Travis, but I love this first slide because the brain is really the star. And so when you look at the right-hand side and you see the head and you see that little guy in the driver's seat, the brain, it really is. It is the driver's seat. It is in the driver's seat. The brain runs the show. And so when we talk about neurofeedback, just if this could even be the takeaway that we're not doing something, the brain is doing something, and that thing is optimizing itself. And once that happens, we can just get out of the way. It really is that simple. The brain knows what to do. Why isn't it doing that? We'll talk about that in just a minute. In every case, it's doing a lot. But why are there some things it's not doing? We'll talk about that in a minute. So to recognize the brain as this incredible self-optimizing and transformational system that sometimes gets a lot of flack and it doesn't get the credit. It's like, oh, my brain is foggy, or oh, my brain's not working. But when we think about our brain, this person. When we think about our brain, think about a child, the miracle of learning and acquisition of new skills. It just seamlessly happens. And it's something that we really take for granted, that this child is going to learn to, in general, most of the time, unless there's some type of pathology going on, the child's going to perform these complex neurological processes very quickly that they need to do to sit up, to use their hands and feet, to use their fingers and toes, to crawl, to walk, and then to learn language. If you just contemplate what all is involved in some of those processes, it's incredible. So then, once we're adults, it doesn't stop there. The same self-organizing and dynamical, so the brain is dynamical. Dynamic means it's moving. Dynamical means it's moving and learning, moving and changing at the same time. So once we're adults, we're still all the time acquiring new skills, and all the while we're still doing the things that subconsciously that we don't focus on, like digesting our food, secreting hormones, our heart's beating, we're breathing. We're not focusing our attention on those most of the time, but they're just happening. But can we say that our brain is performing all of the time in an optimal state? And most of us can look at our results, look around. I'm looking at a mess in my office right now. And we can look around at our results. So whether that's the results in our life, whether that's the results in our body, whether that's the results in the way we feel, can we say our brain is functioning optimally? And if it was, would these results be happening? So we can see there's areas for improvement, whether it's more efficient sleep, managing stress better, self-esteem, confidence, improving our mental acuity, enhancing our learning ability, our capacity, or general physical or mental wellness, because that's all organized and managed by the brain. We can see that our brain could use some fitness training. That's really what neurofeedback is training. So it's got a lot, the brain has a lot to handle, and we want to keep it in tip-top shape. For some of us, there is even evidence, like we've even been given a diagnosis of a suboptimal or unfocused brain. That doesn't really matter when it comes to neurofeedback, but some of you or some of us have been told that our brain is suboptimal. It's not something that we just are intuitively know, but we've been told this by a professional. Okay, so this is why I like to put these two pictures by each other, because on the left, we have a picture that probably doesn't mean a lot to you right now, but it's an example of what you will see on what's called the matrix mirror. And that's NeurOptimal's neurofeedback matrix mirror. And that happens during a brain training session. The bars and the colors on the graph represent real-time brain activity. And that's data, which I like to call the language of the brain. The brain speaks in a language, and that language is frequency, electricity, and it gets converted into data. And that's what we see here. And that's what's driving this little guy on the right. So unfortunately, for those who don't love math, yes, it is all math. The brain is all math, and neurofeedback is all math. These frequencies reflect the brain's data, and that ultimately determines the function and expression of our day-to-day life. So before we go to the next slide, just a little bit about me. I do have a personal interest and have had a personal interest in neurofeedback for years, several years. When I practiced as a nurse practitioner in pain medicine, I was introduced to neurofeedback, and that's something that we would usually refer patients whose chronic pain seemed to be emotionally or mentally based. We've come a long way since then, thinking that neurofeedback is only for the specific subset of people. But then when I moved to neurology and specialized in that, I really became acquainted with neurofeedback. So when I would refer a patient to have this, they usually had pretty good things to say about it. It seemed like it depended on the practitioner, and we'll talk about that a little bit too, who was performing the neurofeedback, whether the patient had a positive experience. But there was other problems too. There were access issues. It was difficult for people to get in. There was waiting lists, scheduling issues, expense. The demand for this modality was really not being met by the supply or the number of available operators. Meanwhile, on a personal level, I was very tense and just like an anxious mess. And my patients never knew this because I hid it very well. I suppressed it. So I really wanted to get my hands on this for myself, because after my brother, who is a gang unit specialist police officer in the LA County, described to me that he felt completely free after he did, from his PTSD, after he did neurofeedback, I was just like, okay, I need to know more about this. So when I finally learned about the possibility of having my very own device, I jumped at the chance. And then I've researched extensively, and this patented, unique system was right for my family and I know it was right for Jen and for Balance Health. We've experienced shift after shift from my in-laws. I'm pointing over here because we live together, from their sleep and their mental acuity to my 12-year-old's confidence and her school performance anxiety, to my husband and I being far less reactive with each other and much more calm and relaxed. Life just seems easier. And that is something I hear over and over again. So let's learn a little bit more about this, shall we? Okay, what is neurofeedback? Just for the nuts and bolts of it, so for those who aren't familiar, neurofeedback gives us an opportunity to receive operational information. So I already talked a little bit about this feedback. This information is data from our brain being dynamical. Remember, dynamic means it moves, but dynamical means it learns. So when the brain receives this information, it takes it and learns from it. That's how we start. We started out with the baby. The baby falls. Next time it learns, okay, so I need to put a little bit more pressure on this leg. Okay, I need to broaden my stance. Okay, I need to have my arms spread up. The baby's brain is constantly assimilating the data from external and internal environment and then learning. Otherwise, it would never walk. So that's what our brain does. Again, why isn't it doing that all the time? I'll give you a hint. The brain can't always see what it's doing. So, but this neurofeedback is a specialized and advanced form of feedback that gives the information back to you about the brain as it is occurring. So real-time data from the brain's activity is being shown back to the brain. So the electrical activity generated by our CNS, our central nervous system, can be detected by sensors that are placed on the scalp. And I'll show you a picture in a minute, and displayed on a monitor in real time. And that's called an EEG. So this is medical grade equipment. This is not a gadget. This is actual medical grade professional equipment that we're using. So if you look on the left-hand side, it says brain training. So I love using that as an analogy. When we train, especially those of you at Balance Health, you know that they're very focused on the fitness of the body, because we know how important that is. The brain is equally important to train and to keep fit. It is also something that needs to continually tuned up. It's likened to defragging, those of you who like computers, defragging your hard drive, bringing order to chaos. So helping teach us self-regulation, mind training, brain training and mind training. And I make that distinction because brain training, we're talking about electrical activity, data. Mind training, we're talking more about thoughts and persistent and consistent patterns of thought that can get us stuck. And that goes to the next one, barrier eliminator. Those consistent and persistent patterns of thought get us stuck and form barriers where I don't know about anyone on this that's listening to this, but have you ever felt like you're stuck? And like you know everything you need to know. You've assimilated all the information, accumulated all the information, you've read all the books, and you're just still stuck. It's like you still can't get past this barrier. And that's what neurofeedback is. It's a barrier eliminator. So on the right-hand side, again, just for repetition's sake, measures brain activity, provides feedback to alert the individual's brain to the activity, and we'll talk about how that happens. The software reads that and interprets the activity. Okay. Next, linear or nonlinear, dynamical. Nonlinear and dynamical are the same thing. So do we want linear or nonlinear neurofeedback? I'm not able to see you guys right now, but I'm going to guess that most of you are like, I don't really even know linear, nonlinear, what's the difference? But it might come up when you're comparing. Some people have had neurofeedback before and they've said, okay, first of all, it was really expensive. I had to go and get this mapping done, and they had to do this scan, and it's called a QEEG. And then they based the protocol off of that scan. And there was a practitioner who performed the neurofeedback. I had someone just recently tell me they ended up being hospitalized with linear neurofeedback because they had a traumatic brain injury. And she feels very strongly that that practitioner didn't know what they were doing, pushed her brain too far in one direction, and she ended up in the hospital. So there's a huge difference between linear and nonlinear. If you look what I put on the left, I said linear, it's antiquated. It goes off of the EEG only, which is frequency and amplitude, the brain waves that we see on an EEG go up and down. So it's how often and how high or how low. It's 2D and it's antiquated compared to the new technology of nonlinear, which looks at 4 different aspects of our brain's dynamical activity, including duration. Duration is timing. Timing is everything. If we're not taking timing into account, we're missing the biggest piece of this puzzle. And then also shift. This technology is able to anticipate when your brain is about to shift, alert the brain to that potential, and let the brain decide what it wants to do. It's incredible. So with linear, sometimes the frequencies that are chosen in that first appointment can be wrong. And so that can be a problem, because what is a QEEG or that brain mapping? It other than a snapshot in time. When you take a picture, who of us the next day, unless you're like really stuck in that clinically state of depression or in a coma, even then your EEG, it changes. Your brain is constantly changing. So if we take a snapshot and then we say, based on this snapshot, if I took a snapshot of Jen right now and said, based on this snapshot, we are going to make all kinds of changes. And she's like, well, wait a minute, 5 minutes from now, I look completely different. And that's one of the drawbacks of linear neurofeedback is that it's too limited. The other drawback is it requires this skilled technician that has to create a protocol that's based on that data. So this person has studied frequencies, and they really, really know a lot about neurofeedback because they are going to do neurofeedback to you. When you are allowing a nonlinear dynamical system to interface with your own brain, you're not doing anything. Your brain is communicating with the data that is being mirrored back to it, and you just sit back and relax. And the brain is much more intelligent, your own individual brain, than somebody outside of you guessing, really, with trial and error of what would be best for your unique brain. So what this looks like for patients is that it feels like stability. The brain starts to feel more organized. It's 100% non-invasive. Another great thing is that you need no training, no expertise, because that's built into the system and you can use it at home. So that's incredible. How does it work? So I said we would talk about this, but first, what it is not. So it is not voodoo. It doesn't involve any chemicals. It's not risky. It does not involve any shock. It's not electric shock therapy, and it doesn't involve any electricity. There are some linear neurofeedback systems that do a little shock to the brain, and that is the feedback. That's the interruption. Not with NeurOptimal's neurofeedback. It's not hypnosis. It's completely non-invasive, and it's not computer assisted meditation. It's so much more than that. It's not just meditating while a computer is listening to your brain, watching your brain, looking at it, and you're meditating. No, you could be doing your homework, paying your bills, sleeping, and it would still be recording your brain's activity, and your brain would still be responding to that in real time. So we like to use the analogy of how this works, looking at the picture on the right, of like, well, first of all, you see the person sitting in the chair. They're wearing some sensors and a headset. They're looking at a screen. They don't have to be looking at that screen, but there are some beautiful images, not the matrix mirror that I showed you with all those lines, but some beautiful imagery that you can watch while you're having your neurofeedback training done, if you want, or you can just relax and close your eyes or do something else. But that person is with the sensors having their information fed back to this software, and their own brain responds and adjusts when it senses that the brain is internal or externally experiencing turbulence. So your brain gets to decide what's turbulent. And voltage fluctuations on the left-hand side of that picture are measured with the EEG. And this is a proprietary technology that uses duration, intensity, frequency, and shift. And it is able to anticipate and also show the brain these shifts. The brain decides whether that's turbulence or whether that is just a shift or a change that the brain naturally is going to make. Again, the brain is much more intelligent in knowing that. But why is the brain not automatically just doing this all the time if it's so intelligent? And so that's why, before I get there, the sensors are active at C3 and C4. If you look at the little guy in the chair, it says C3 and C4. Those are where the two little sensors are put on your head. That's where the most comprehensive data is collected. We use a specialized conductive paste, and the rate at which the data is being collected is 256 times per second. That is a lot of data being collected and analyzed very, very quickly. The closest thing with linear is 32 data points per second. So this is well beyond 32. What, maybe 6, 7 times that? Okay, so using an analogy. I like to use the analogy of a mirror, and maybe you're wearing a shirt and you have a stain on your shirt and you don't realize it, and you're walking around with stain, and maybe your friends haven't been nice enough to tell you that you have a stain on your shirt, or maybe there's even a rip in your shirt and it's starting to tear at the integrity of your actual fabric. And you're just walking around until you see yourself in the mirror. Once you see yourself in the mirror, you immediately stop and say, oh, okay, I'm going to now do something about this. Or you may decide, I don't really care about this shirt. It's an old t-shirt. I'll leave the stain. But you now know what you didn't know before, which was there's a stain or there's a rip. You now get to make a decision about that. So that's the reason that our brain isn't constantly making all of the adjustments, because it's not able to see all of its own activity. And neurofeedback is what allows it to do that. It mirrors its activity back to it. Another analogy I like to use is a balance beam. If you are on a balance beam and you're starting to lose your balance, I like to use this with linear versus nonlinear. If you start to lose your balance and maybe your coach, if you're a gymnast, pushes you back and restores your balance, that is an adjustment from an external source. But if you had mirrors all around and you could see yourself from every angle, you would immediately be able to see where your loss of balance is coming from, make your own adjustment. And I think we all know when you do something yourself, you learn. You can learn when somebody adjusts you too, but you learn much more quickly and it lasts longer when you're learning it for yourself and you're making your own adjustment. So that's how this works. Who can benefit? So many people can benefit. Neurofeedback is widely used by top-tier organizations and individuals who want to improve their physical and mental performance, such as athletes. Say this guy here. This is all NeurOptimal. Professional trainers, business people, musicians. There's a little girl who reminds me of my daughter, but that's not my daughter. This is my daughter up here. Performers and students. So she's a student. And it is used in schools, mental health facilities, which is where I used to always refer. But now more and more it's being used by general health practitioners because it's been made more available. People who want to improve their cognitive function to maximize or optimize their cognitive function, like people who are in the aging population can benefit from this. Okay, so what happens in a session? Just one moment, please. Okay, so sorry that I have to use this, but I wasn't able to get this onto my PowerPoint. So this is a very pleasant experience. The brain does all the work. You don't need to have any conscious effort. You don't need to do anything but just sit there. Come to the clinic, sit down, and you're going to get the benefits. You don't need to try to control your thoughts and be like, okay, let me think peaceful thoughts, calm thoughts. Let me think positive thinking. Okay, let me bring up this memory. I want to really work on this memory and focus on this experience. None of that. You don't need to think anything in particular at all to make it work better. By the time that your brain has consciously registered the interruption in the music, the brain's already responded and moved on. Because remember, 256 times a second. So when you hear those little, I guess I didn't tell you right here, when your brain perceives the turbulence, you're listening to music. That's what's going on the headphones. And the music will very briefly pause. You'll hear just a tiny pause in the music. And that's how your brain is given the feedback. The brain is like, what was that? This music's not supposed to pause. What just happened? Your brain is brilliant and it interprets that as a change. Why did it pause? The pause in the music is an auditory cue. That also love the analogy of like a deer in the forest is grazing and all of a sudden they hear a branch snap and all of a sudden their attention is diverted. Auditory cue. the brain hears that pause in the music and says, what just happened? And it learns. Over time, it learns, and this happens very quickly. So that's the auditory cue that we were talking about here, that by the time you hear, your brain's already moved on. So you don't need to be like, oh no, I just heard a pause. Oh, what was I doing? What was I thinking? No, you just sit there and relax. Most of those little pauses you won't even hear because, again, 256 times a second. So most of them are so short that you won't hear them. And when you do hear one, it's because there are multiple different areas of your brain that are quote unquote suboptimal or turbulent at the same time. Okay, so sorry about that. You will be seated. Oh, sorry, we're still over here. So there's nothing you need to do. We are not suggesting any additional activity to make it optimized. So before, you're going to fill out a form if you're at the clinic describing how you're feeling and how you wish to feel. You're going to be sitting in a comfortable chair. You want to look at the screen, you can, you don't have to. 2 sensors are going to be placed on your scalp here, numbers 4 and 5, that's C3 and C4, those spaces on your brain that capture most general data. They capture the most data of any 2 points on the scalp. And then 1, 2, and 3, these are all denoising. There's so much electrical activity and noise going on in the air, so many waves that we don't even perceive. So we need to denoise them so that those other 2 are just picking up your brain activity. And you've got earbuds that you can easily hear the music. If you cannot tolerate earbuds, some people don't have ears, very few, and small babies, it doesn't work for them either. So you can just use the speakers on the device. You don't have to use the earbuds. For best results, the earbuds are recommended. And then once the training begins, you hear the music with very brief occasional interrupts, and you can watch a random visualization or the monitor if you wish, or nothing. And it really is that simple. All right, back to this. So where do you start? There are lots of places to start. I'm going to ask if there's questions in just a few minutes, and I don't know if we're going to stop the recording at that point, but I do want to just let you know that this is so easy to get started. You can start on site. You can do sessions there. And I did not double check with Jen, but I know that typically the range is between $60 and $120 per individual session. That range is so wide because you can get discounts when you package and bundle your sessions. And so if you're going to have one session only and never have another session, it could be as high as the $120. If you're packaging those sessions, you can get it down as low as the $60 with special offer that we'll talk about in a minute. You can purchase your own device. The device runs from $10,000, let's just round it off to $500, to $11,000. And that is without protection. If you carry protection or finance the device, then you do need to add protection to that. If you finance it, there's a 0% interest option. It's so easy to do. That is really great. That's how I purchased my first device. And it's really the only way I was able to get my first device was because of this amazing financing option of 0% with a down payment. And anybody who wants to know more about that, certainly let us know. But Balance Health is offering, they do have NeurOptimal, have been carrying the NeurOptimal device and providing NeurOptimal sessions for months